Okay, good afternoon. My name is Patricia Wyrick, and I am the Rural Forestry Program Coordinator for South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. We are very appreciative of Leah Burgess with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to talk about conservation easements and who the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items that need to be discussed. Today's workshop will be recorded, with the recordings being placed on the Department of Ag and Natural Resources YouTube channel for public viewing once reviewed and approved by the DANR technical support team. DANR is an equal opportunity provider and wants to encourage participation. However, if you would not like to be a part of the live recording, an email when the recordings are uploaded will be sent out to everyone who registered for the webinar. All microphones and videos have been turned off, and due to bandwidth concerns, we request that they stay off during the presentation, but feel free to turn them on during the question and answers portion, of which the recording will be ended. At the end of the presentation, we'll be taking questions. All your questions can be placed in the chat box, or you can raise your hand to be allowed to turn on your microphone. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Leah, who is a Senior Conservation Program Manager for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks for inviting me to do this talk today. I'll just give you a brief introduction of myself and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and then discuss some of the programs and operations that we do. So again, my name is Leah Burgess. I'm a Senior Conservation Program Manager. My region is basically the Rocky Mountain West, to include South Dakota and Nebraska, primarily the Black Hills, western portions of those two states. I'm based in Laramie, Wyoming, but our national headquarters is in Missoula, Montana. So the mission of the Elk Foundation is to ensure the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. And that mission directly influences the programs that we then work on. We are a membership-based organization, and so I think we have about 220,000 members nationwide. About 4,000 of those are located here in South Dakota. Our primary program areas are land conservation and access, hunting heritage. Something's going haywire with the slides here. Hold on one sec. Okay, land conservation and access, hunting heritage, habitat stewardship, and wildlife management are our key program focus areas. So RMEF was founded in 1984 by 4 conservationists and hunters and businessmen who started to wonder and worry about what might happen if habitat for elk was threatened or might disappear. And so they formed the Elk Foundation, started in a warehouse in Missoula, produced the Bugle magazine publication, and started holding fundraisers and working with agencies to protect land. So that's kind of how it all began. Since that time, though, the organization has grown tremendously, and to date, RMEF has worked on or partnered with over 13,000 projects, including the 4 main types that we discussed previously, has influenced nearly 8.4 million acres, whether that's a conservation easement, an acquisition, or enhanced habitat, being things like prescribed fire or forest management, treating weeds, things like that. One of our components that we focus on is also improving public access to public lands, and so we've affected over 1.4 million acres in that way. We've had projects in nearly every state, and I think Hawaii is the only state we haven't had a touch with. And combined with our partners, of course, we've influenced more than $1.4 billion in conservation value. I know this series is focused on conservation easements in particular, so this is just a snapshot of the conservation easements that the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation holds nationwide. South Dakota, here we have 20 conservation easements on over 32,000 acres of land. Okay, so just a little snapshot to give you a feel for what we accomplished in a year. So this was for the year 2021. Nationwide, we helped complete 147 projects, which affected 138,000 acres in 21 states. And those projects, again, would be things like juniper thinning and removal, aspen enhancement, weed treatment, prescribed fire, water developments, fence modifications for wildlife movement, things like that. Hunting Heritage is another program area, and that includes things like hunter education, supporting 4-H sports, shooting sports, education trunks, wildlife education trunks for the classroom, hunting workshops, food preparation, things like that. So again, in 2021, 209 projects in 39 states. We also fund science and research. And last year we funded 22 grants, and primarily those come to us from universities and their wildlife management and research units. That can be land management, range management, forestry management projects as well. And those grant applications come through our state and national program offices. To hone in a little bit on the lands program, we have about 10 staff located around the country. So again, I'm a field-based staff person in the lands program. I cover the Rocky Mountain states. There's about 9 more of us out in the field, some covering one big state like Colorado or California, and many people covering multiple states. Our primary conservation tools are conservation easements, fee title acquisitions. Usually that might be an in-holding, say in the Forest Service, where the landowner wants to sell the property to the Forest Service. We act as kind of an intermediary entity to help facilitate that transaction. We accept land donations and either can serve them or sell them for acquiring money for more land conservation. And we help participate in land exchanges with agencies and private landowners. Just a little review about what are conservation easements, and I know there have been other land trusts on talking about that, so I won't dwell too much. Again, it's a legal agreement between a landowner and an authorized holder of a conservation easement like the Out Foundation. There's several groups in South Dakota that do hold conservation easements, or that can, including South Dakota Agricultural Land Trust. I think that's our newest land trust in the state. Northern Prairies Land Trust, who's kind of branching out into the Black Hills area, RMEF, the Nature Conservancy, the Conservation Fund, and Ducks Unlimited, who hold, I think, primarily Wetland Reserve Program easements, which is a program under the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Key features of conservation easements: of course, they restrict the amount and type of development on a property and promote sustainable land management. The terms of a conservation easement are very much specific to the property and to the landowner's future wishes. Easements don't provide for public access automatically, and most don't. The vast majority don't, unless the landowner wants to do that or the entity holding the easement and the landowner have agreed that that's a component of the project, but that's not a requirement by any means. Some more features of easements. Lands under easement do remain in private ownership. They can be bought and sold like any private land. Easements run with the title to the land, typically in perpetuity. Easements can be sold or donated by the landowner. So if you can work with an entity who can raise funds to actually acquire the conservation easement value with cash, that's one way to go, or you can donate the value of conservation easement in exchange for federal income tax credits and estate tax credits. Easements can be, selling a conservation easement requires a significant funding source to provide money for the purchase. So in South Dakota, that can be a little limiting. We don't have many programs that provide funding for conservation easements. However, the Natural Resource Conservation Service does have a program that funds agricultural land easements, and we often partner with that agency to complete conservation easements in South Dakota. There other surrounding states have like a state funding source. For example, Nebraska Environmental Trust has a state source of funding. Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust here in Wyoming has a source of funding. Colorado has Great Outdoors Colorado, which really significantly increases the amount of conservation easements that can be accomplished, and I mean purchase conservation easements because of those funding sources. Probably a lesser known program of the Elk Foundation is Private Land Stewardship Grants Program. So if a landowner is interested in, say, treating noxious weeds on their property or doing a forest management to remove maybe beetle-killed trees or thinning, maybe thinning of conifer within aspen stands, prescribed fire, seeding native vegetation after a fire, doing water developments or spring exclosures or things like that. Maybe modifying their fence lines if they've been impacted by wildlife or elk movement. So we have programs and small grant money to actually assist landowners with doing those types of management activities on their property. We typically do require a match that can be in kind with volunteer labor or fuel and machinery, whatever the landowner might have to show as matching investment in the project. We encourage landowners to cooperate with their local land agencies, whether it's state forestry or NRCS or conservation districts, or say South Dakota Game Fish and Parks to help develop a program, but it's not required if you have a good feel for what you need and what the project design would be. So that's kind of a neat, unique niche that we have, as we can partner with private landowners to provide some match for that sort of project. Just to kind of run through some numbers for South Dakota. Again, in South Dakota, we have about almost 4,000 members, and let's see, I think about 17 chapters. And so chapters include volunteer committees, basically, that put on fundraising banquets for the Elk Foundation in their location, and then proceeds that are raised at those go back into our granting programs for habitat stewardship, hunting heritage, wildlife management, and conservation and access. Our volunteers and members also do work projects. If an agency or a landowner has like a fence conversion project or some other, maybe installing a water guzzler, something like that, our volunteers can organize and come out and do field work on site as part of a volunteer work day. So again, these are kind of our main program areas. This gives you a snapshot of throughout time what RMEF has invested in each type of project area, and then a little bit about our membership and volunteers. Just a visual of how and where we do work. So the red dots indicate where our chapters are. So that's where we have volunteers that put on banquets and events and raise money. We have a few in the Black Hills area, and then a few in the eastern East River and eastern South Dakota that love to come out to the west in the Black Hills. We don't have a lot of projects in the eastern side of the state just because it's not really elk habitat. And of course, we focus our program work on areas where elk live. But that kind of gives you a representation. The dark blue dots are land conservation. And so again, those would be either conservation easements that we've completed or acquisition projects that we've either worked with an agency on or partnered or provided some funding in some way. The blue are habitat stewardship, and that includes prescribed fire, forest management, weed control, water development, things of that nature. So that's kind of in a nutshell, RMEF 101. If anyone is interested in, say, our landowner small grant program for habitat work or a conservation easement, this is my contact information. lburgess@rmef.org. Please reach out to me and I can get you some information and application forms for the habitat work, or we can discuss conservation easements or an acquisition, whatever it is you might be considering. That's kind of a quick version of us in a nutshell, but I would love to take any questions that you might have.